few words before we begin reading this week's Torah portion. New book, new story, and very interesting Torah this morning. One of the unexpected and surprising results of the catastrophe of October 7th are all of the calls that Rabbi Leibowitz and I have received from people in the community. Rabbi, you don't know me. I'm not a member of your synagogue. I was only there once for a bar mitzvah or for a wedding or for a basketball game with my kid. Because, Rabbi, I never thought of myself as that Jewish. But since this started to happen, I can't sleep. I can't live my life. I spend every minute staring at the phone looking for the news. I can't explain myself to my kids or to my spouse or to my friends why I'm angry all the time. Rabbi, I never knew I was this Jewish. What do I do with this? What do I do with this? I mean, it reminds me of a story at the end of the First World War. There were men who came back from the front in Europe suffering from a disease that was called at that time shell-shocked. Today we call it severe PTSD. They had been exposed to live fire, and one of the symptoms of being severely shell-shocked was severe amnesia. And these men would come home, and I suppose at that moment they didn't have dog tags, and they didn't know who they were. And so what they would do is take these people around to boxing matches and theaters and stadiums, and these poor people would stand on the stage and cry out, "Does anyone know who I am?" The person who calls and says, "I didn't know I was this Jewish," they're not just asking, "What do I do with this?" They're asking the question that we will find in this morning's Kriya. Mi anochi? Who am I? What does it mean to belong? What does it mean to identify? What does it mean to be part of this people? What does that mean for me and my life? And that's what this Torah portion is focused upon. Now you know that the names of the books of the Bible, particularly the books of Torah, the books get their names in the most arbitrary way. They simply took the first big word in the first sentence of each book, and that became the name of the book. So the first book of the Torah is called Breshit because it's the first word of the book. But there's something ironic in this because the name of the book, even though it was chosen arbitrarily from the first big word in the sentence, those names still capture the essence of the book. First book is called Breshit, which means in the beginning. It's the beginning of the world, the beginning of humanity, the beginning of our people, and the foundational concepts, the foundational narratives, the foundational values that constitute our faith. That's Breshit. This book is called Shemot. It begins, Ve'elu Shemot B'nai Yisrael. These are the names of the children of Israel who went down into Egypt. Shemot, names. This is a book of identity. It's going to wrestle with this question of what does it mean to be part of this people. The third book, by the way, is Vayikra, which means God called, and it's about God calling and our response. The fourth book is Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. In English, it's called Numbers, because it begins with a census. But in Hebrew, it's Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness, and it is the story of a social wilderness. People who have no sense of solidarity, no sense of direction, no sense of purpose, and they're screaming at each other. And the fourth book is called Devarim. In English, it's called Deuteronomy, but in Hebrew, Devarim, which means words. It's the words Moses speaks and the words upon which our faith is based. This book is called Shemot. In English, it's called Exodus, which means it's always mixed up with the Leon Uris novel and the movie with Paul Newman and Eva Marie Saint. This land I love. That's not this book. This book is Shemot. It's a book of identity. And it's going to be a meditation on the question of what does it mean to be part of us? And it's going to try to answer that question. So let's see what it says. Look on page 317. Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Yisrael abayim Mitzrayim et Yaakov. These are the names of the children of Yaakov. Now, the name of our people is B'nei Yisrael. But literally, the word B'nei Yisrael literally means the descendants, the kids of a guy named Jacob, a guy named Israel. And then it gives the names, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, the names of the family. The first answer to the question of who are we is we are a family. We are a family, and we feel a sense of family solidarity. When our family, and in family is a very paradoxical thing, at least my family is very paradoxical. We love each other, and we scream at each other. Now, I know your families are quiet, polite, well-mannered, pass food, you don't grab food. My family, none of that. My family's one argument from beginning to end, but ferociously in love with each other. That's what family is. That's what the Jewish family is. We are family. Since October 7th, the American Jewish community has raised more than $500 million to send to Israel. Can you imagine? And just instantaneously, charities arose. Instantaneously, people have stepped up. And in Israel itself, that's one of the remarkable stories of Israel itself. When the government failed to respond to the crisis, people stood up and responded on their own out of a sense of solidarity. We are a family. What do I have to do with an Ethiopian Jew who looks very different than me? What do I have to do with a Yemenite Jew? What do I have to do with a Hasidic Jew? What do I have to do with those people? They may not even accept me as a Jew or as a rabbi. They're still my mishpacha. They're still my family. That's the first answer to the question. So who are we? We are family. Turn the page. A new king arose over Egypt who didn't know Yosef. And that king is paranoid. He looks out and finds all these Jews on his front lawn and says, what am I going to do about these? And he begins a process of limited genocide. The second answer to the question is, we are a people with a narrative. What unites us is a narrative, a story. And the story begins badly. It begins with slavery. You ask a Jewish person, what's your story? They're not going to tell you where they went to high school. They're not going to tell you how they began in his business. They're not going to tell you when they moved to Southern California. They're going to tell you, I was a slave in the land of Egypt. The Passover Seder is based on this idea. Bechol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo kilu yatzah miMitzrayim. In every generation, each of us has to see that we were there. My personal biography begins with, I was a slave in Egypt. You want to understand how I look at the world? You want to understand how I conceive of politics? You want to understand my social ethics? You want to understand my sense of the world? I was a slave in Egypt, and I was liberated from there. So this is a narrative, and it's a narrative that carries a message about how you conceive of the world and how you conceive, most of all, of history. Because I was a slave in the land of Egypt and I met God in that experience, I see reality through the lens of that experience. What is our history? History is the journey from the house of bondage to the promised land. History is the journey from slavery to freedom. History is the journey from oppression to liberation. That's history, and I have a full and complete faith that no matter how disgusting, brutal, cruel, oppressive persecution might be, one day there will be an end. We will come to the promised land. That's the Jewish faith. That's what the narrative tells us. And anyone who signs on to that narrative is welcome to join us. That's the second answer to the question. What makes me Jewish? I tell a story about myself, about us, that goes from slavery to freedom and codifies my faith that history will end in redemption. Therefore, I carry hope. It's the most ironic piece of our being. This little teeny people that has been beaten and smashed and hated and oppressed and persecuted more than any other people on this world still maintains this idea that history will end with redemption. Can you imagine? You people are stubborn. You are so stubborn. Then there's a caveat. There's a little story in here that doesn't belong. It doesn't belong because it doesn't add anything to the story. It says, Pharaoh wanted to get rid of us, and one of the ways he tried to get rid of us is by co-opting the midwives of Egypt to throw all the Jewish boys into the Nile, right? So take a look at 320. So the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, and he said they were named Shiphrah and Puah, which are Egyptian names. These are Egyptian women. He goes to the obstetrics ward, and he says, when a Jewish woman gives birth to a kid, kill it. When you deliver the Hebrew woman, look at the birth stool, it's a boy, kill it. The midwives, fearing God, the Tirena Elohim, it's not the God of Israel. They respect the God of life, because what a midwife does is bring life. And her mother was a midwife, and she brought life. And her mother was a midwife, and for 10,000 generations, we were bringing life. These women aren't ready to start becoming killers. So they give up. They resist Pharaoh. This is, by the way, just incidentally, the first example, the first literary evidence of civil disobedience in the name of justice. Brandeis University gives a Shiphrah and Puah award every year. Martin Luther King was the first. Nelson Mandela. Those who have resisted oppression in the name of justice. Shiphrah and Puah and all the midwives of Egypt saved the Hebrew boys. When Pharaoh calls them in the court, they give him an answer he's ready to hear. He says, why the heck aren't you killing the kids like I told you? He said, no, you got to understand, Rabbi. You don't understand Pharaoh. These Hebrew women, they're beasts. Before we get there, they've had a litter of 6 kids. All Pharaoh can say is yes. Now, why is this story here? It didn't work. It was an attempt at limited genocide that didn't work. And the answer is because you have to understand that you are not the only moral heroes in the world. 2 Egyptian women are responsible for the fact that we exist in the world. Can you imagine that? 2 Egyptian women. So if you see an Egyptian in the street, you can't scream at him and say, you son of a gun, your people enslaved me, because that could be the descendant of Shiphrah and Puah. You should go give them a hug and thank them. No, I'm very serious about this, because we get into this mentality that we are somehow morally superior to everybody else in the world. We Jews are really good at this. Our chauvinism shows. One of the reasons why my teacher, Rabbi Shulweiss, spent much of his career celebrating Christian rescuers during the Holocaust. That our children and our children's children might know that we have allies in the world. The Presbyterian minister in the neighborhood who called me a couple of weeks ago, and he said, where can I buy a mezuzah? I said, why the hell do you want a mezuzah? He said, I have a men's group. We've decided we want to put mezuzahs on our doors. Rabbi, if they come for you, they're coming for us first. I got on Amazon. I bought him 40 mezuzahs. And there are 40 Presbyterian families with mezuzahs on their doors out in here. We have allies. We have friends. We feel pretty lonely right now, but you have to know we have friends. And we have allies. And we have those who are willing to put a menorah in their window and a mezuzah on their door because they feel what Shiphrah and Puah felt. And our kids need to know that we have allies and friends. That's the second piece of identity. Here's the third piece of identity, chapter 2, which we'll read in a few moments. In this chapter, I want you to look, as Yossi reads the chapter for us, or as Oren reads the chapter, I want you to watch very carefully for all of the places you see the word, the root, Resh Aleph Hey. Ra'ah in Hebrew means to see. This is a chapter about seeing. It begins with the first beginning. The man of Levi went and married a woman of Levi. They have a kid. And it says, V'terana oto, and she sees him. How beautiful he was. Now, wait a minute. Come on. What Jewish mother doesn't think her kid is the most beautiful kid in the world? Can you believe a Shena Punim like this one, right? You telling me he was a miskite, they would have thrown him into the Nile? Come on. It says, Ki tovhu. She sees in him something remarkable, and she hides him. And then when she can't hide him anywhere, she puts him in a basket and floats him up the Nile. Please don't try this at home. And he's spotted by the daughter of Pharaoh. Imagine, the daughter of the guy who promulgated the genocide. She's the only one who sees him. And she fishes him out of the Nile and adopts him, names him Moshe. She sees him, and his mother sees him. And he grows up with two women who have remarkable eyes to see what nobody else can see. And then the story tells us what happened. Look at page 323, verse 11. Vayehi bayamim ahem, and so it was, Vayigdal Moshe, Moshe grows up. When Moshe had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk. But the question is, who are his kinsfolk? Moshe has two mothers. His mother is the princess of Egypt, and his mother is a woman of the slaves. He has two homes. He lives in the palace, and he lives in the slave quarters. He can be a prince of Egypt or a slave of the Egyptians. And we don't know who he identifies with. He doesn't know who he identifies with. He goes out, Vayar b'sivlotam. Now the word sivlotam is also double entendre. It can either mean their labors or their suffering. The average Egyptian goes out and stands on the portico of the palace and sees all these slaves building Egypt. What does he see? A greater Egypt rising from the sand, economic progress. Or does he see slaves cruelly, brutally being broken in front of him? But you can't see a social phenomenon. You can only see one at a time. 6 million were murdered in the Holocaust, but the only thing we can focus on is the plight of one 13-year-old girl hiding in an attic in Amsterdam. Or one 15-year-old boy dragged from a Hungarian village and incarcerated at Auschwitz. We only look at one. And so Moses sees one. Look at the next line, page 324, top of the page. I'm afraid you got to do this in Hebrew because the English doesn't catch it. Vayar, he sees. Ish mitzri makeh ish ivri me'echav. Everybody see that line? Ish means what? Man, person, human being. Mitzri, an Egyptian man. Makeh, beating to death. Ish ivri, a Hebrew man. Me'echav, one of his brethren. What does the average Egyptian see? What is a slave in the mind of Egypt? A slave in the mind of Egypt is not a person. A slave in the mind of Egypt is not even an animal, a beast of burden. A slave in the mind of Egypt is an appliance. It is a quantity of work personified. We call that an appliance. Not one of you woke up this morning and checked to see if the microwave had a quiet night. Not one of you woke up this morning and caressed the refrigerator. You should have, but you didn't. That's what a slave is. A guy beating a slave is the equivalent of what? We used to have a television set, and if you wanted to get channel 11, you had to hit it just in a certain spot. Anyone ever have a TV like that? Right? You ever have that TV, right? Wiggle the plug to get the thing to work a little bit, or mess with the switch, or change a tire by the side of the road, or reboot the computer. That's what beating a slave is what you do. You got to beat a couple of them each day. In other words, the average Egyptian walking by sees what? Nothing. But Moses walks by, and what does he see? Ish mitzri makeh ish ivri. When the Torah repeats a word, it's trying to tell you something. Ish. He doesn't see a taskmaster disciplining a slave. He doesn't see an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. He sees two human beings engaged in a transaction in which one is inflicting horrifying violence on the other. And then it says, Me'echav, one of his brethren. Now that can mean a couple things. It can mean that Moses can see that the Egyptian and the Hebrew are related to each other in a very deep way. Or it can see that that's the moment Moses opens his eyes and sees that that slave is his brother. That's the moment he decides, would you rather be the hammer or the nail? Would you rather be the oppressor or the oppressed? Who do you identify with? And at that moment, Moses, prince of Egypt, decides, that's my people. And he's filled with rage, and filled with pain, and filled with violence. And he strikes down the Egyptian. But before he strikes down the Egyptian, he does one more little thing. Look again. Vayifen kovacho vayar ki ein ish. Remember the word ish again? He looks this way and that way. Ki ein ish. Maza? There's nobody there. What is he looking for? Am I the only one who sees this? Am I the only one who witnesses this? Am I the only one who's going to do something about this? Does nobody else see this? And here you have the third element of Jewish identity. We have been given eyes to see what nobody else in the world can see, particularly the suffering, particularly the brutality, the distance between the world as it is and the world as it ought to be. And that's the third element of Jewish identity that this Torah portion will meditate on. Moses will run away to the desert. He'll spend 40 years living as a shepherd in Midian. He has a beautiful wife, wonderful kids, a big television set in his living room. He lives a very nice life. He's the vice president of the Midianite Stock Exchange. His father-in-law is the chieftain of the Midianites. One day, he will find a bush that is burning and doesn't burn up. You'll find that in chapter 3. And out of that bush will come a voice and say, you have a responsibility in the world to bring the world to what it ought to be, to begin the journey from the house of bondage to the promised land. And before Moses agrees to do it, he will ask the question, Mi anochi, who am I? And God will say, take the journey, I will be with you. You will discover who you are somewhere along the way. So may we all. Page 317, we begin reading Parshat Shemot.